As Esther was saying, I am the coordinator of research for the National Quinto Encuentro. Just a show of hands, how many of you have heard about the Quinto Encuentro? That's great. How many of you would say that you're knowledgeable about the Quinto Encuentro? And how many of you have participated in the Quinto Encuentro? Great. So for those of you who, I have this the wrong way. There we go. Who may not be so familiar with the Quinto Encuentro, it's a 4-year process that strives to improve the lives of Hispanics and Latinos and to empower Hispanic Latino Catholics into leadership in the life and mission of the Catholic Church in the United States. Through a process of intense missionary activity, consultation, leadership development, and identification of effective ministerial practices in the spirit of the new evangelization. So that's kind of a long run-on sentence, but it gives certain parameters about what the Quinto Encuentro is about. You can see the word vocation is not in that sentence. Discernment is not in that sentence, but there are a lot of intersections between what this conference is about and what the Quinto Encuentro has been about since its start. We are currently in the 3rd year of the 4-year process, so there's a lot of information that has been gathered through the consultation piece. We have a lot of insights that have been gleaned from the formation processes, the leadership formation, as well as the missionary activities. But it's still kind of a diamond in the rough. You know, we don't have any finished products to print. That will be coming in the next year or so. And actually, the Quinto Encuentro process began before the Synod was announced. So I think it's a sign of the Spirit moving in the Church that we have these two big things going on here in the United States at the same time that are complementary, and we feel that there's a lot that the Quinto Encuentro can say to the Synod process as we go forward. So what has been done so far? Just a few highlights. In terms of mission, we've reached nearly 250,000 people who've been touched by the process, either as direct participants in the sessions or people that were visited. About 2,500 parishes and 91% of dioceses have participated. 130 dioceses have already had their Diocesan Encuentro. So there's different stages, starting with small groups, the parish, the diocese. We're moving into regional encuentros, and then the last level is the National Encuentro. Next weekend, Region 1 will host the 3rd regional encuentro in the country. That's the Northeast. Leadership, over 30,000 leaders have received training in missionary discipleship, and nearly 100 Hispanic ministry positions have been created at the diocesan and parish levels. And in parishes, about 300 parishes began their first formal outreach to Hispanic Catholics through the Quinto Encuentro. So it's been a great mobilization of ministry and outreach in the Catholic Church. Some of the major sources that I want to share with you today are, first of all, a survey of diocesan chairs from the Quinto Encuentro. So every diocese has appointed someone to coordinate, and actually the last slide was coming from that survey. Just a few insights, like the number of parishes that are just starting in Hispanic ministry, or the number of positions that were created. That came from the survey that we did last summer. Diocesan and regional statistical reports. This is information that I and my team have been gathering, actually looking at data going back several decades, but especially focused on more recent data, as well as collecting information directly from the dioceses. So I'll talk more about that in a minute. The Diocesan Encuentro working documents. So for the Diocesan Encuentro, every diocese is tasked with preparing an analysis based on the conversations that were had in the small groups, the missionary outreach, and the parish encuentro. And so these documents have started to come in, and I'll share some insights from that. We did a survey of youth and young adults at the NCYC, the National Catholic Youth Conference, as well as online. We realized that we didn't have enough youth and young adults participating in the encuentro. We wanted more information, so we targeted them with an online survey. Then grassroots consultation. That's going all the way back to the small groups and the missionary outreach. People were invited to record the conversations that they had and some key insights from those. And they were invited to enter that information online. Not everyone did, but we have some insights from those surveys that were collected, or consultation forms as we're called. The last two actually haven't happened yet. The National Census of Latino Ecclesial Ministers coming up later this year, and this will be very pertinent to the work of the Synod. We'll be trying to do a complete census of Latinos in church service. Priests, deacons, religious, lay ecclesial ministers, and seminarians. And we'll be asking them questions that will shed light on their own call. Much of what we do is mixed method, so we have statistical information that we gather as well as just raw conversations. We're even doing video, and all of that information is being coded and analyzed to move forward the work for the conclusions that will come out at the end of the process. And then lastly is a survey of parish coordinators of the Quinto Encuentro. At the end, we'll be going back and talking to the people who have walked through the process from the beginning and see how the process has impacted their experience of the church and their ministry. But I want to start with the diocesan and regional statistical reports. These are actually going up online, the Quinto Encuentro website, vencuentro.org. If you go to the second tab, which is Encuentro, there's a menu item for diocesan participation. And so a report is being prepared for every single diocese, as well as regionally and eventually nationally, with statistical information. What are some of the sources for this? Much of the data is coming from the 2016 American Community Survey. This is from the U.S. Census Bureau. A lot of social and demographic information is parsed in charts that are available in these reports. That survey includes about 3 million people. In some dioceses, the Hispanic population was too small to be reflected in a statistical sample, even with 3 million people nationwide. So we went to the 5-year sample actually from 2012, because in 2012 the geographic definition changed, and so we had to use 2012 to 2015, I'm sorry, 4 years, and we had almost 12 million people in that sample. So we were able to zoom in and really get some interesting insights at the diocesan level from the census data. Also, Catholic analysis from the best available surveys, and this goes back to 1990. The American Religious Identification Survey, Pew, AVA is the American Values Atlas, CARA, many different sources were used. And one of the things that Pew found about 10 years ago was that when you ask Latinos information about or when you survey Latinos, if you ask them in Spanish, you get different results than if you ask them in English. And so that kind of called into question or invalidated some really great big surveys going back to the 1990s where they only asked questions in English. So we supplemented, for example, the American Religious Identification Survey had 100,000 people that were asked about their religious identification in 1990. But we supplemented that with surveys that targeted Latinos that were much smaller, had a much smaller sample size, but we feel in some ways maybe more representative because it was done bilingually. And then finally, directly polling the diocesan directors and coordinators in the Encuentro process to gather information about church attendance, Catholic school student bodies, the number of priests, deacons, religious, and so on. So I'll share some of that as well. And you can see more of it in the reports online. As I said, going back to 1990, we actually collected data on the overall size of the U.S. Catholic population and broke it down by race and ethnicity. This is not from the Kennedy Directory. It's not from CARA. We did this ourselves, as I said, using the best surveys going back to 1990. And you can see that based on this information, the top line is the total number of Catholics in the United States. And it peaked somewhere around the year 2005 and has been declining since then. The white Catholic population is the yellow line. and it probably peaked before 1990 because it was already declining at that point, and has been on a steady decline as the population ages. The baby boomers are not being replaced by the younger generations, and of course we all know about the growth of the nuns, the non-affiliated. The Hispanic population overall, apart from just Catholics, has been on a tremendous growth line, and that growth was reflected in the early part of this chart. It peaked around 2010, and since 2010, the Hispanic population has grown by about 8 million in the United States, but the Hispanic Catholic population has remained about even, hasn't changed much. So the organic growth, and of course, much of this was affected by immigration in the 1990s, especially in early 2000s. It has decreased significantly. In fact, Pew, I think, says that we have net zero immigration from Latin America at this time. And so this is the natural growth offset by younger generations no longer identifying as affiliated with the Catholic Church. And with the Black, Asian, and other, the Asian population has also grown tremendously, and while the Black Catholic population has declined somewhat, and they've kind of offset each other, so it looks mostly like a flat line at this point. This map identifies 70 dioceses where most Catholics are Hispanic already in 2016. So the blue are dioceses where an absolute majority of Catholics are Hispanic. The red are dioceses where there is no absolute majority group, but Hispanics are the largest among the minority groups. And then the orange are the dioceses where Hispanics are the largest racial and ethnic group among Catholic children, so ages 0 to 17. And so that kind of shows where, looking ahead 10, 20, 30 years, these places will likely be majority or mostly Hispanic at that time. Catholic to priest ratios, and I think this is an important insight for the topic of this conference. We're all very aware about the decline in religious vocations, and if you go back to the 1950s, 1960s, I think there were something like 600 or 700 Catholics for every priest in this country. And it varies depending on which ethnic group you're looking at. But actually, white Catholics today, it's about 1,250 white Catholics for every white Catholic priest in the United States, which worldwide is still one of the lowest ratios in the world. If you look at European Catholics, it's about 1,500 to 1. Overall in the United States, we have about 2,000 Catholics for every priest. Asian, and this is Catholics in Asia, not Asian Americans. So in Asia, it's about 2,500 to 1. In Africa, it's about 5,000 to 1. In Latin America, it's about 7,500 to 1. And then I looked at the Hispanics, but I grouped it in different ways. So if you look overall Hispanic Catholics, there are about 10,750 Hispanic Catholics for every Hispanic Catholic priest. But if you look just at immigrants, it's about 6,500 immigrant Hispanics in the United States for every immigrant Hispanic priest. With the U.S. born, there's 23,000 U.S. born Hispanic Catholics for every U.S. born Hispanic Catholic priest. Now, part of this is because of the huge immigration that has taken place. So the median age for U.S. born Hispanics is about 18. The median age for immigrant Hispanics is much higher, it's over 30. So we have a lot of second generation children and young adults who really aren't even old enough to be priests if they wanted to, if they were called to it. So that kind of impacts the way these numbers play out, but nevertheless it's a startling picture. And what it says is that I don't think it's an issue that God is not calling U.S.-born Hispanic Catholics, but rather that the accompaniment and the pastoral care that they've received in the church maybe has been lacking, and maybe for quite some time. part of this too is the reality of Catholic education. And so this is just K through 8 and high school. We don't have complete data yet. This is information that's still coming in. But regions 1, 5, 13, and 14 are the ones that have had their regional encuentros, or in the case of region 1, this weekend. So we have more complete information for them. And what you can see there, the blue and the purple bars represent the overall percentage of Catholics of that age group in that region that are Hispanic. And then the orange and the yellow represent the percentage of Catholic school students that are Hispanic in those age groups, so K through 8 and high school. Region 14 comes the closest to having more or less proportional representation among Catholic school students. If you look at the reality of the Archdiocese of Miami, which is huge, they have a large Cuban population where it's, a little bit wealthier, and many more of their students are enrolled in Catholic schools. So that offsets some of the rural and more recent immigrant dioceses like the ones in North Carolina, North and South Carolinas, and so forth. So that kind of gives you the statistical picture that we're working with. Diocesan Encuentros, working documents, so this is the information coming in. Just to give you a little bit of a sense of where we're at, 130 dioceses have completed their Diocesan Encuentro. We're expecting about 160 overall. We were hoping that they would all be done by now, but some dioceses have picked it up a little bit later than others. So this is where we are. About 60 of them have submitted at least part of their final report. And as that comes in, it's being coded and analyzed in preparation for the regional gatherings. About 35 diocesan reports have been analyzed for the 3 regional working documents that have been prepared so far. So regions 5 and 14 always work together. That's the area that is served by the Southeast Pastoral Institute in Miami. And so they held a combined regional encuentro. That was last weekend, actually. Not this past one, but the previous one. And Region 13, which is the Southwest, also had theirs that same weekend, and upcoming is Region 1. Some of the things that were like hot topics or overarching themes coming out of what the people in the diocesan encuentros were saying, one was in the area of family ministry. What were they looking for? They're calling for bilingual pastoral counseling for families, couples, and youth. They're saying this is badly needed. Retreats, prayer groups, and large events, especially even regional gatherings for families, where it would be bilingual, and resources and conferences, workshops could be done to help parents in raising their children. Help for immigrants, undocumented and separated by deportation. In some cases separated by incarceration. Big needs in the Hispanic community. Parenting resources and instruction, especially in light of cultural differences. You would think that parents and children are of the same culture, but when one is an immigrant and the other is U.S. born and educated, there's some real significant cultural differences that need to be worked through. As well as in Christian sexual formation, helping parents to pass the Catholic vision of human sexuality, and training for young people as well in that area. In the area of youth and young adult ministry, they were calling for diocesan and parish programs for Pastoral Juvenil Hispana. So it's not enough that there's a youth group or a young adult group. They want a place, especially as immigrant young people, where they can connect with others who share their story and know what they're going through. Vocational retreats for youth and young adults. Again, looking for something bilingual, or where they can choose which language it will be best serving them in. Bilingual programs, retreats, and events. Some cases they were calling for a regional youth day, which doesn't exist in every place. Formation for young missionary disciples. Empowering them to take up their call as missionaries and disciples of Christ. to their peers and protagonists in the ministry, giving them leadership and responsibility for what is going on in the Pastoral Juvenil. Acceptance and promotion of youth movements. There's so many movements that in some cases the pastor doesn't feel that it's appropriate or needed, and so they're kind of isolated or left on their own. The young people are saying, this is important to us. We want to have this better recognized in the church. Acceptance, or go deeper in the faith, scripture, spirituality, and involve more young people in the liturgy. Leadership development, comprehensive bilingual training for lay leaders and ministers in each diocese. Biblical formation and leadership training by age, again, giving a new impetus to forming young leaders especially. A continuing education for priests to help them better serve the Hispanic and Latino communities. And that might involve language, it's also culture and intercultural competencies. Formation for evangelization and mission, making that a priority, and regional ministry congresses each year. And then finally, with regard to vocations, they're asking for more Spanish study for seminarians, because they want more priests who can speak to them in their language, and not just be able to recite the prayers of the Mass. Incorporate the history, methodologies, cultures, and intercultural skills for Hispanic ministry into seminary formation. There's a whole wealth and literature on Hispanic ministry and Hispanic and Latino theology that is by and large ignored in centers of pastoral formation and ministry formation, especially seminaries. And the people are asking for that to be included so that our priests are not, monodimensionally prepared to serve the Hispanic community, but multidimensionally. Increase vocational retreats in both languages, work with parishes and families to increase awareness of Hispanic ecclesial vocations. So it's not just on the parish, it's the family as well that needs to get involved, and find ways in culture that families can be supportive of a call to ministry in the church. And also recognizing the role of God in organizing prayer for vocations at all levels in the church. So I hope that's gave you enough of a taste that you say, I'm anxious to see what the final documents are going to be. Come to our website. We'll be continuing to post information as it's developed. Look for those statistical reports, and with all of my other panelists, I'm sure we'll be happy to take some questions in a moment. Thank you.